Greetings, spear beings, greetings, green being. We are all the human race, our common enemy is death. Welcome on Perfect Society. I'm Ulrich Hofmann, and this is the broadcast. Neutral status talks must be arranged, extremely important. Why is this so important? To avoid a world war, to de-escalate the situation. Perhaps this is the best solution and or the only solution to avoid a cyber attack on the global financial system, which you could argue is a war crime, because millions of people will die from that, according to Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. A comprehensive cyber attack would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, the hospital services, transportation, and society as a whole. And he also claimed it would kill more people than the COVID-19 pandemic, what some call a plandemic, for a number of reasons. So we have to prevent that. So that's why it's a war crime. It's a weapon with an indiscriminate effect, you could argue, because many civilians would die from it, not military, which may be prepared for such an event. And also it could escalate into a world war, of course. Russia with its allies, US with its ally countries, and some people are after that. They're trying to bring it about rather than prevent it. So that's why I want to focus on bringing true peace to the Ukraine. What are the options? Let us know in the chat. I appear to be live on Perfect Society. I've written some email, but let's go to that first article, which I think expresses most aptly what it's about. Fundamental solution lies in neutral status of Ukraine. February 28, 2022. Today is the 1st of March. February at 28 days. 2022. And many people have already predicted a cyber attack. And that would fit in with their cashless society scam. But after that, of course, people would not have Bitcoin anymore. So I advise everybody to store water, especially. People can live for about a day to 3 days without water, because a cyber attack on the power supply means that the electrical pumps of the tap water would not function anymore without power, and then people will not have tap water anymore. So it's important. I've filled my bathtub with water and have a water filter. And then people could also use rainwater, but you cannot drink unfiltered rainwater. And also a radiological water filter in the event of an EMP or nuclear weapon attack. We'd also need radiological water filter, iodine pills, and perhaps a nuclear biological chemical gas mask filter. But many people think they're not planning that. They're planning for a cashless society. The quote prediction, unquote, of Mr. Schwab of the World Economic Forum is, you will own nothing and be happy. So we have to prevent this global genocidal cyber attack on the global financial system, the internet, and the power supply, especially transportation, hospital services. And one thing I think is that they could easily repair that, but they're going to pretend that they cannot repair it, and that it's easy to take measures now so that it cannot happen. Especially the power supply should be protected. Also the power supply of nuclear power plants to prevent a meltdown of Borselen in the Netherlands, for example, or other nuclear power plants worldwide. Fundamental solution lies in neutral status of Ukraine. This is news.cgtn.com. But there are many other articles that I've prepared for this broadcast, so we'll read this perhaps. I'll read some articles, beginning with, I just go from left to right. This is MSN, The Guardian via MSN, Microsoft News. Russia-Ukraine war, latest news, 40-mile-long Russian army convoy near Kiev. Satellite images show live updates 5 hours ago. If I reload it, it may be 6 hours or 7 hours with live updates. They haven't declared the Ukraine a neutral zone yet. And we see that at the same time they're discussing Switzerland to sanction Russia despite historic neutrality. So that means they would lose their neutral status, you could argue. Sorry about that. Glass fell. That was my ginger lemonade. So, then it's better to read an article while I clean the table and the floor. Perhaps it's best to begin with that article, and then I'll do an intro or important stuff later. What else did I think of? Yeah, that it's easy to repair and that they can have an off-the-grid internet like Russia has. Russia still has internet, but it's an intranet rather. So it's not going to be global anymore after that. But then at least the people can still communicate within the country via that intranet, the reserve internet of Russia. And I did cover that in previous broadcasts, so check them out. For as far as that's still possible, I'm working on getting the global resistance back. I wrote to Google, so I hope they reconsider removing the videos that they don't like and that are in violation of their policy, and I've promised to live up to the policy much better than before. So that's what I'm doing, and I hope that these articles will be enough reason to reconsider neutrality and prevent that global cyber attack which could kill 7 billion people, in combination with gene drive technology, which is a technology 170 global groups want a moratorium on. But more about that in other broadcasts. For now, I first want that article that I showed earlier. Fundamental solution lies in neutral status of Ukraine. Yeah, I put my glass on they call it a slick gym. It's a sort of mini cloud buster. I think that's better, risking that it falls over. So perhaps I can make a construction so that it cannot happen anymore, because it's the second time when my mic is in front of it and I don't really see the glass. And I'm fully concentrating on this broadcast, obviously. So let's just use the text-to-speech engine.
Fundamental solution lies in neutral status of Ukraine. Why wouldn't share?
Okay. I'll do it like this so that I can use the professional reading thing.
Fundamental solution lies in neutral status of Ukraine. Why wouldn't share? The apartment block in 6A Lobanovsky Avenue, which was hit with a missile in Kyiv, Ukraine, February 26, 2022, /CFP. Editor's note: He Wen is a senior fellow at Center for China and Globalization. The views expressed in the article are the author's personal views and do not represent those of CGTN. All eyes are on the Russia-Ukraine military conflict, which has become the top news around the world these days. Leaders of the US, NATO and EU states have all condemned Russia and announced a set of most severe sanctions. China has made clear its stand for upholding the UN Charter, respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, taking into full account the historical complexities, and seeking a peaceful solution through negotiations. Then how can one find a fair and feasible solution to this problem? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine lived peacefully for over 20 years. But the U.S.-backed color revolution in early February 2014 changed the political environment and geopolitical interests in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government has since followed a clear-cut policy to line up with the West, seeking to join EU and NATO, which was written into the constitution in 2019. On the other side of the scenario is the constant eastward expansion of NATO since 1991, a strategy put forward by the US, against its promise of not expanding an inch eastward. On July 8, 1997, NATO summit decided to accept Poland, Hungary and Czech membership. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovenia, Romania and Bulgaria became the NATO members on November 22, 2002, followed by Croatia and Albania's membership of NATO on April 3, 2008. The US has been the prime engine of NATO's eastward expansion. Its strategic goal is to enhance its leading role in Europe and contain Russia from rising up again. A close look at the map of Europe presents a clear picture that Russia has been almost totally blocked on its western border except Belarus and Ukraine. So if Ukraine joins NATO, there will be no buffer zone between NATO and Russia, which is a direct national security concern for the latter. NATO, an aggressive not defensive organization, is a super-military alliance with massive arsenals directed at Russia. For example, it launched its barbarous bombing on Yugoslavia, including Chinese embassy in Belgrade, and finally dismembered the country. Apparently, Ukraine's potential NATO membership crosses the red line of Russia's strategic security. Over the recent years, and especially over the past 2 months, Russia had very intensive talks on its security concerns, demanding NATO's rejection of Ukraine, but was rejected bluntly by the US and NATO. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky made no conciliation with Putin and insisted joining NATO and attacked the local forces in Luhansk and Donetsk, counting on all the mighty strength of the US and NATO. Under these circumstances, Putin ordered the special military operation and hence the outbreak of Russian-Ukraine military conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky speaks to the nation in Kyiv, Ukraine, February 27, 2022, /CFP. But after the beginning of Russia's special military operation, Ukrainian people suffered tremendously. Some of the Ukrainians had to find shelter in the subway to avoid air raids, and at least 120,000 more fled to Poland and Moldova. Over the past 8 years, Ukraine's economy went from bad to worse and it became the poorest countries in Europe, with per capita GDP at only $3,724.90 in 2020. But as US President Joe Biden has had talks with Putin in recent months, it is hard to imagine that Biden didn't know what Russia's red lines are vis-à-vis Ukraine. It's more of a fact that the US intended to witness a Russian attack so it can get an excuse to impose sanctions and augment its leadership position in NATO and Europe. The scenario also helped in suspending the Nord Stream 2 project, forcing Europe to buy American natural gas. What is more, a turbulent Europe means profitable arms business for the American military-industrial complex. It's worth mentioning that Europe will not be a winner because European security, energy supply and trade, which can only be secured by stable Europe-Russia ties, will be severely influenced. The role of EU will also be overshadowed by a U.S.-dominated NATO. The root cause of the situation is the wrong strategic positioning of Ukraine in European geopolitics. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger once pointed out that Ukraine should be a bridge linking the West and East, rather than a chest by the West to contain the East. It still holds true today. Therefore, an ideal solution for the current crises would be for the Ukraine to maintain a neutral status by not joining any military alliance, which would help develop good relations with the US and Europe while maintaining friendly relations with Russia. In this situation, Ukraine could keep a peaceful and constructive environment and further develop its economy. Russia can feel safe on its western border, and Europe-Russia trade and energy cooperation can grow in peace, thereby leading to a balanced and sustainable security landscape for Europe.
Yes, of course, we should pursue peace, de-escalate. Diplomatic solutions are the best option for all parties involved, except the banks, perhaps, that make money from wars. They lend the money to countries and parties on the condition that the victor pays the debt of the vanquished. So perhaps arrangement can be made so that it can't happen anymore in the future either. Possibility of a peaceful solution for Ukraine crisis, another CGTN, news.cgtn.com article, February 21st. But I also have a number of other articles. I've dried up the table and floor a bit. It's also on my legs. But it's biological ginger lemonade, so I can make a new one. Russia-Ukraine war, latest news. Oh yeah, I was reading this. 40-mile long Russian army convoy nears Kiev. Satellite images show live updates. President Zelensky also talked about well, I don't know if he was supposedly elected with electronic voting. I don't believe in electronic voting. So I haven't checked if he's really the president or if Putin and Biden, people have doubts about him being real president. So usually I say Zelensky, Putin and Biden. And I don't use the title president. Anyway, Zelensky made clear that the Ukrainian people are supplied with weapons, and of course if 40 million Ukrainian people have weapons, then the million Russian troops don't stand a chance. It's comparable to Vietnam, perhaps, where there were other reasons why it wasn't working for the American soldiers. Anyway, so it's super important to have a ceasefire announced, and Zelensky already made clear that he's ready to comply and to be a neutral zone instead of become part of NATO. Yeah, I would say stop attempting to invade Ukraine, de-escalate the situation, show that you are willing to do something as well, and to Biden and others to de-escalate by not imposing sanctions that could lead to a cyber attack or even world war that would escalate the situation. And Zelensky could also consider surrendering. If their troops are outnumbered, then the military themselves could also do this. Because would it be so bad to become part of Russia? Are they really super communist? China has the Chinese Communist Party. I'd have to investigate it. I don't know too much about it. And I'm not going to read this article as it's not on topic enough, but that's how I started with a search on Putin neutral zone Ukraine at DuckDuckGo. Then I ran into these other articles. Hundreds detained across Russia. Now in commercial. How do I get rid of it? I can't even read the title. That's on msn.com. Oh, and then it changes. So it's not news that they want in this video, perhaps. Well, that's psychotic to think that. It's nonsense, of course. Hundreds of... But an AI could do such a thing, of course. UN 136 civilians death, including 13 children in Ukraine since the start of Russia's invasion. Do they do that deliberately? Instead of 136 civilians dead, they write 136 civilians death. Isn't that weird? And is this originally... The link is blocked. Normally that appears in my left bottom corner when I hover my mouse pointer over the link. Then my mouse pointer starts bubbling, basically green. When it's not a link, it's a ball that's floating around. So this is on bostonglobe.com. That's the link. There are an infinite number of ways to prevent this cyber attack and gene drive mass extinction, because everything is energy, everything is possible. So we're lucky that there are 170 global groups that want a moratorium, a ban of CRISPR-Cas9 gene drive technology that will help to keep it voluntary. And it makes clear why it's illegal to make it mandatory, obviously. Because the long-term effects have never been tested. They cannot guarantee not everybody will die from that, quote, vaccine, unquote, in the long term. Inoculation, injection. And if it would be effective, then they'd be protected. So then unvaccinated people cannot contaminate them anymore if it's a sterilizing vaccine. Truly effective, and otherwise they shouldn't call it effective. So people that don't take the vaccine or gene drive technology, if you don't want to call it a vaccine, should be able to get a quantum dot to be able to get that basic income and buy food again and water and things they need to survive, basic things, you know. So we should put a halt to medical tyranny, medical discrimination, and medical apartheid should be stopped completely. It serves no purpose. But more about that also in my previous broadcasts on this channel. Perfect society, of course. War in Ukraine enters a new phase, even more unpredictable and dangerous than the last. Oh yeah, and then I have to check for neutral, let's see. Switzerland ditches neutrality to sanction Russia and Putin. CNN via Microsoft News, MSN.com. It's not a quote neutral unquote zone, but it's a frozen conflict zone, and it will remain that way even if Putin pulls his troops back. Russia invaded Ukraine to annex Crimea during the Winter Olympics in 2014 and invaded Georgia during the Summer Games in 2008. Professor Valerie Sperling claims invasion of Ukraine not in. Well, I doubt it. I don't know. I'd have to study it first. It can all be war, rhetoric, propaganda. It's not. Well, we'll see what the rest writes about. If they call it a neutral zone or neutral country, like Switzerland used to be, or perhaps they still are, just not when it comes to violation of the UN Charter or other things. Another article that I saw in relation to that is UN should evict Russia, then implement no-fly zone in Ukraine. WashingtonExaminer.com. So we could read that as well, but first I want to watch some other articles. Also search on the word neutral in this article. It's about Switzerland again. The revised main law also sheds Belarus neutral status, opening the way for stronger military cooperation with Russia. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who has edged even closer to Russia amid crippling Western sanctions over his crackdown on domestic protests, said he was confident that Belarusians will support a set of constitutional amendments that would allow him to stay in power until 2035. The revised main law also sheds Belarus' neutral status, opening the way for stronger military cooperation with Russia, which deployed forces to Belarusian territory under the pretext of military drills. And the innocent civilians are to be spared. You could argue it should only be between the military and the civilians should be kept out of it. You could also argue they should just play a game of chess and the winner gets the Ukraine or whatever, without innocent people dying all the time. But it's best to just go home, to declare a ceasefire and say this is wrong. Desert, you can also say that you're feeling sick or whatever. And also to leave the Ukraine, to go to a safe area, to Europe for example. As long as they're not having that ceasefire and neutral status. So that's that article on Clark now. clarku.edu. Perhaps I'll read that as well. One word that will stop Putin's war machine. RESPECT, respect. Perhaps they were listening to the song while writing the article, israelnationalnews.com. Next. CitizenFreePress.com. Putin presents Ukraine with two demands. February 28, 2022. Russia ready to negotiate with Ukraine. Kremlin. February 24th, 2022. So that's about 4 days ago. Russia ready to negotiate with Ukraine. Kremlin. The Kremlin presents Kiev with two demands. Moscow is willing to negotiate terms of surrender with Kiev regarding the ongoing Russian military offensive currently taking place in Ukraine, Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday. And today, it is Thursday. Was that last week, perhaps? Or was that today? Oh, it's Tuesday, sorry. So it was last week, Thursday. Today's Tuesday, the 1st of March, at the time of making this video. According to Peskov, Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed his preparedness to engage in discussions with his Ukrainian counterpart, with a focus on obtaining a guarantee of neutral status and the promise of no weapons on its territory. Putin offers to negotiate.
Putin offers to negotiate.
Alright.
Putin offers to negotiate. Moscow is willing to negotiate terms of surrender with Kiev regarding the ongoing Russian military offensive currently taking place in Ukraine, Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday. According to Peskov, Vladimir Putin has expressed his preparedness to engage in discussions with his Ukrainian counterpart, with a focus on obtaining a guarantee of neutral status and the promise of no weapons on its territory. These
One idea I have is letting the UN or NATO also put this on the table, this neutral status, to de-escalate the situation and to prevent our societies from collapsing over the Ukraine, to prevent Holodomor 2.0, to de-escalate and create universal peace, create a perfect society in which we all will live happily eternally, and also control all factors that control aging in time. Some people call that achieving negligible senescence.
Are terms that, according to Peskov, would enable the achievement of the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, and eliminate what Russia currently views as a threat to the security of its state and people. The president formulated his vision of what we would expect from Ukraine in order for the so-called red line problems to be resolved. This is neutral status, and this is a refusal to deploy weapons, Peskov clarified. The press secretary added that Putin would determine the timing of the negotiations, but gave assurances that Russia would only engage if the leadership of Ukraine is ready to talk about it. The operation has its goals, they must be achieved. The president said that all decisions have been made, and the goals will be achieved, Peskov continued, suggesting that, if Kiev were to agree to meet the demands, the current military attack on Ukraine could be called off. Throughout the course of Thursday, the operation has become a full-scale assault, with Ukrainian airports, military bases, and cities, including the capital Kiev, all being damaged in airstrikes in an attempt by Russia to cripple any Ukrainian military response. Source: RT. CitizenFreePress.com.
Okay, next we have en.marenews.com, Mare with the H, Mare News Agency. EU places Putin Lavrov on sanctions list, February 25th, 2022. Tehran, Russia has launched a military operation, blah blah. Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a televised address on Thursday morning that in response to a request by the heads of the Donbass republics, he had made a decision to carry out a special military operation in order to protect people, quote, who have been suffering from abuse and genocide by the Kiev regime for 8 years, unquote. The Russian leader stressed that Moscow had no plans of occupying Ukrainian territories. Putin wants Ukraine to become a, quote, neutral buffer zone, unquote, Russian Observer, February 19th, foxnews.com. Alright, then perhaps I can play this. Is this a video about it? I think so, so let's play that then. I like Fox News' presentation, and let's see if I can get this to work with the other settings like this. Alright.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is personally overseeing large-scale drills involving nuclear forces as tensions rise between Russia and Ukraine. Amy Kellogg is live from Moscow with the latest. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Griff. Well, one of the Russian TV channels just ran a report on the invasion that never happened, mocking the fact that the West has been hyping this invasion that was supposed to have happened this week and may happen next week, basically trying to destroy the credibility of those who have said they believe that President Putin has in fact decided to invade Ukraine. This, as the media really plays up the reports of the evacuations that are happening, people leaving from Donetsk and Luhansk, those republics in eastern Ukraine that are under the control of Russian-backed separatists. Now, these would be Russians or Russian speakers, and Moscow's narrative is that those people right now are very unsafe, unprotected by Kiev, and under threat by Ukrainian forces, and effectively that Russia needs to save them. They are building toward that. The U.S. calls this movement of people, these evacuations, part of the false flag activity that is going on. Meanwhile, Russia conducted massive nuclear drills on Saturday. They involved ballistic and cruise missiles and took place in various locations around the country. President Putin sat watching the drills with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. I asked a former Soviet propagandist, very well known in the West, if he had any advice for how Putin is handling the situation.
Actually, I'd have more to say to President Biden than I would to President Putin. I think they misjudge the man. They don't understand the man's character. This whole story about wanting to resuscitate the Soviet Union, bring back the empire, take back territory is totally off base.
That may be, but clearly President Putin does not want to let Ukraine go. And some Russian observers have said that it's not that he actually wants to invade or take Ukraine, that he just needs to have it as a neutral buffer zone. But we heard President Zelensky of Ukraine today at the Munich Security Conference saying that Ukraine will be nobody's neutral buffer zone. Griff.
Amy, just a quick follow-up. You're on the ground there in Moscow. What is the feeling there amongst the
as a neutral buffer zone? But we heard President Zelensky of Ukraine today at the Munich Security Conference saying that Ukraine will be nobody's neutral buffer zone. Griff.
Amy, just a quick follow-up. You're on the ground there in Moscow. What is the feeling there amongst the...
Well, I have not heard him say this, and of course he should reconsider, and NATO and the UN, those very United Nations, could also help to turn it into a buffer zone to prevent more innocent civilians from dying and to prevent a world war and cyber attack, which would kill more people than the COVID-19 pandemic, what some call an scamdemic, plandemic, for several reasons. So that means more than 6 million people who die from whatever that cyber attack encompasses. And many people don't realize what they have, that without power supply and without the internet, but especially without the global financial system, it becomes very hard to do business. Though, that was the other idea, they could continue doing business with cash, basically. So people could get their money out of the bank now, that's all gone after the cyber attack. Of course, people can have gold and silver, and crypto cannot be used anymore either. When the global financial system and power is gone, then that's gone as well. So to buy storable food, get water, to prepare for this, makes it much easier to survive. I'm not going to mention what I'm not going to mention in this broadcast, but I am going to mention that we must work towards peace, stabilization, and demilitarization instead of a world war and a cyber attack, to make sure people own nothing. I think some people are really trying to bring that about rather than to prevent it, But most people don't want a war. They want peace and security. They don't want this to escalate. Mutually assured destruction, a world war between Russia and the US, a NATO ally country. They realize peace is a far better option for everyone, especially the civilians. So let's switch back. This is Opera 1. Alright. So I haven't heard Mr. Zelensky say that, but I've read negative things about him as well. Next, Reuters.com. Is it loading? It was loaded already. Kremlin. Fighting reaches the outskirts of Kiev. Reuters.com, February 26, 2022. The Kremlin said earlier it offered to meet in the Belarusian capital Minsk after Ukraine expressed a willingness to discuss declaring itself a neutral country, but that Ukraine had proposed Warsaw as the venue. That, according to Russian spokesman Dmitry Peskov, resulted in a, quote, pause, unquote, in contacts. So the UN could also help NATO to convince Mr. Zelensky that that's the best option to avoid further bloodshed and to bring peace and stability to the Ukraine. Instead of a world war, that we should de-escalate and work towards peace, global peace, universal peace. So get storable food, water, protection, a helmet and such, and get your money out of the bank and get fossil fuels, natural gas, and gasoline will be priceless practically after this.
Fighting reaches the outskirts of Kyiv by Maria Tsvetkova. 7-minute read. Register now for free unlimited access to Reuters.com. Summary. Fighting reaches the outskirts of Kyiv by Maria Tsvetkova. Ukraine and Russia will consult in coming hours on a time and place for talks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's spokesman Sergei Nikiforov said on social media, offering the first glimmer of hope for diplomacy since the invasion began. The Kremlin said earlier it offered to meet in the Belarusian capital Minsk after Ukraine expressed a willingness to discuss declaring itself a neutral country, but that Ukraine had proposed Warsaw as the venue. That, according to Russian spokesman Dmitry Peskov, resulted in a pause in contacts. Ukraine was and remains ready to talk about a ceasefire and peace, Nikiforov said in a post on Facebook. We agreed to the proposal of the President of the Russian Federation. But U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said Russia's offer was an attempt to conduct diplomacy at the barrel of a gun, and that President Vladimir Putin's military must stop bombing Ukraine if it was serious about negotiations. The diplomatic overtures stood in stark contrast to events unfolding on the ground and Putin's harsh rhetoric against Ukrainian leaders, including a call for a coup by the country's military. Kyiv residents were told by the Defense Ministry to make payroll bombs to repel the invaders, and on Friday evening witnesses reported hearing artillery rounds and intense gunfire from the western part of the city. The sound of frequent artillery fire, apparently some distance from the city center, continued in the early hours of Saturday. Zelensky filmed himself with aides on the streets of the capital, vowing to defend Ukraine's independence. Tonight, they will launch an assault. All of us must understand what awaits us. We must withstand this night, he said in a video address posted to his Telegram channel. The fate of Ukraine is being decided right now. Some families cowered in shelters after Kyiv was pounded on Thursday night by Russian missiles. Others tried desperately to get on packed trains headed west, some of the hundreds of thousands who have left their homes to find safety, according to the United Nations aid chief. After weeks of warnings from Western leaders, Putin unleashed a three-pronged invasion of Ukraine from the north, east and south on Thursday, in an attack that threatened to upend Europe's post-Cold War order. I once again appeal to the military personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine, do not allow neo-Nazis and Ukrainian radical nationalists to use your children, wives and elders as human shields, Putin said at a televised meeting with Russia's Security Council on Friday. Take power into your own hands. Putin has cited the need to denazify Ukraine's leadership as one of his main reasons for invasion, accusing it of genocide against Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. Kyiv and its Western allies dismiss the accusations as baseless propaganda. The United States imposed sanctions on Putin, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. The European Union and Britain earlier froze any assets Putin and Lavrov held in their territory. Canada took similar steps. However, the steady ramping up of economic restrictions has not deterred Putin. Moscow said on Friday it had captured the Hostomel airfield northwest of the capital, a potential staging post for an assault on Kyiv that has been fought over since Russian paratroopers landed there in the first hours of the war. This could not be confirmed and Ukrainian authorities reported heavy fighting there. Early on Saturday, Ukraine's Air Force Command reported heavy fighting near the airbase at Vasilkiv southwest of Kyiv, which it said was under attack from Russian paratroopers. It also said one of its fighters had shot down a Russian transport plane. Reuters could not independently verify the claims. The mayor of Kyiv and its 3 million people, former world heavyweight boxing champion Vitaly Klitschko, said on Friday Russian saboteurs had already entered the city. The enemy wants to put the capital on its knees and destroy us, he said. Glory to our defenders. In New York, Russia vetoed a draft UN Security Council resolution that would have deplored Moscow's invasion, while China abstained, a move Western countries viewed as proof of Russia's isolation. The United Arab Emirates and India also abstained while the remaining 11 members voted in favor. Read more. Amid the chaos of war. A picture of what was happening on the ground across Ukraine, the second largest country in Europe after Russia itself, was slow to emerge. Demonstrators attend a rally in support of Ukraine after Russian President Vladimir Putin authorized a military operation in eastern Ukraine, in Prague, Czech Republic, February 24, 2022. Reuters, David W. Cerny. Smoke and flames rise over during the shelling near Kyiv, as Russia continues its invasion of Ukraine February 26, 2022. Reuters, Gleb Garanuk. A satellite image shows a long traffic jam of vehicles leaving Ukraine, near Siret, Romania February 25, 2022. Courtesy of Satellite Image 2022 ? Maxar. Technologies/handout via Reuters. 1:35 Smoke and flames rise over during the shelling near Kyiv, as Russia continues its invasion of Ukraine February 26, 2022. Reuters, Gleb Garanuk. Zelensky wrote on Twitter that there had been heavy fighting with deaths at the entrance to the eastern cities of Chernihiv and Melitopol, as well as at Hostomel. Glory to our defenders, both male and female, glory to Ukraine, he said, flanked by the Prime Minister and advisors in a video posted to confirm he was in the capital. Witnesses said they had heard explosions and gunfire near the airport in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, close to Russia's border. Ukraine's military said Russian troops had been stopped with heavy losses near the northeastern city of Konotop. Britain's defense ministry said Russian armored forces had opened a new route of advance towards the capital after failing to take Chernihiv. Ukraine said more than 1,000 Russian soldiers had been killed so far. Russia did not release casualty figures. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke to his Ukrainian counterpart and condemned reported civilian deaths, including those of Ukrainian children, in attacks around Kyiv, the State Department said. Read more. United Nations Aid Chief Martin Griffiths said hundreds of thousands of people were on the move in Ukraine. The White House asked Congress for $6.4 billion in security and humanitarian aid for the crisis, officials said. Read more. Ukraine has banned men of fighting age from leaving, and at borders with Poland, Romania, Hungary and Slovakia, those seen crossing by Reuters journalists were mostly women and children. White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said the coordinated decision to sanction Putin, something U.S. President Joe Biden had avoided until now, was intended to send a clear message of allied unity. Read more. Russia's foreign ministry said the new sanctions reflected the West's absolute impotence, the RIA news agency reported. Western countries have announced a barrage of sanctions on Russia, including blacklisting its banks and banning technology exports. But they have so far stopped short of forcing it out of the SWIFT system for international bank payments. On Friday, European soccer's governing body moved May's Champions League final from St. Petersburg to Paris, and Formula One cancelled this year's Russian Grand Prix. The European Broadcasting Union shut Russia out of the widely watched Eurovision Song Contest for 2022. Read more. Burn in hell. U.S. officials believe Russia's initial aim is to decapitate Zelensky's government. Putin says Ukraine, a democratic nation of 44 million people, is an illegitimate state carved out of Russia, a view Ukrainians see as aimed at erasing their more than 1,000-year history. He says he does not plan a military occupation, only to disarm Ukraine and remove its leaders, but it is not clear how a pro-Russian leader could be installed unless Russian troops control much of the country. Ukrainians voted overwhelmingly for independence at the fall of the Soviet Union, and Kyiv hopes to join NATO and the EU, aspirations that infuriate Moscow. As air raid sirens wailed over Kyiv for a second day, some residents sheltered in underground metro stations. Windows were blasted out of a 10-story apartment block near the main airport. How can we be living through this in our time? Putin should burn in hell along with his whole family, said Oksana Guonko, sweeping broken glass from her room. Hundreds crowded into a cramped shelter beneath one building after a televised warning of airstrikes. How can you wage a war against peaceful people? Said Victoria, 35, as her children aged 5 and 7 slept in their winter coats.
Yeah, it's disgusting while they roam in their palaces. Innocent civilians and children are suffering, some of them to death. Russia's offer for talks with Ukraine is diplomacy, quote, at the barrel of a gun, unquote, U.S. State Department. Russia's offer for talks with Ukraine is an attempt to conduct diplomacy, quote, at the barrel of a gun, unquote, State Department spokesperson Ned Price said on Friday, saying Russia must stop its bombing in Ukraine if it is serious about diplomacy. All via Reuters.com. Next, Yahoo. Finance.yahoo.com. Update 1. Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status. Official. 1 minute read. That's it already, alright. Well, we can read that fast.
Update 1. Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status. Official Pavel Polyukh, February 25, 2022, 10:58 a.m. middle. 1 minute read, adds detail, by Pavel Polyukh, February 25. Reuters, Ukraine wants peace and is ready for talks with Russia, including on neutral status regarding NATO, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak told Reuters on Friday. If talks are possible, they should be held. If in Moscow they say they want to hold talks, including on neutral status, we are not afraid of this, he said via a text message. We can talk about that as well. Our readiness for dialogue is part of our persistent pursuit of peace. Ukraine currently is not part of NATO or the European Union, though it wants to join both. Anathema to its former overlord Moscow. Ukraine gave up its nuclear arms, after gaining independence on the breakup of the Soviet Union, in exchange for security guarantees from European countries. After pro-democracy protests toppled a Russia-led Ukrainian president in 2014, Moscow annexed the Black Sea Peninsula of Crimea from Kyiv and went on to back rebels fighting government troops in the east of the country. 7 years later, Russian President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine from the air, sea and land on Thursday, and his troops were advancing on the capital Kyiv on Friday. Reporting by Pavel Polityuk, writing by Gabriela Bachzinska, editing by Hugh Lawson and John Boyle. .telesurenglish.net Ukraine and Russia may discuss ceasefire and neutral status. President Zelensky's spokesman says Ukraine and Russia are discussing a possible ceasefire. Photo, Twitter at breaking_9. Published February 26, 2022. Ukrainian President's spokesman Sergei Nikiforov noted that Zelensky agreed with Putin's proposal and was ready to talk on peace and a ceasefire. Consultations about the time and place of the talks are currently ongoing, he said. Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the Ukrainian president's chief of staff, has stated that Ukraine may discuss with Russia a ceasefire and a neutral status, along with a package of security guarantees, local media reported on Saturday. Related. Beijing calls Russia's security concerns legitimate. It will be, foremost, a detailed conversation about peace and a ceasefire. A neutral status with a clear package of security guarantees is an option that will probably also be on the table, the senior Ukrainian official pointed out, according to Union news agency. On Friday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov stated that President Vladimir Putin was ready to send a delegation to Minsk for talks with Kyiv. Later, Peskov said that the Ukrainian side proposed to hold talks in Warsaw and then halted communication. MD Mitan Islam Admd Mitan Islam 1 # Ukrainian President Zelensky has accepted # Russian President # Vladimir Putin's proposal and is ready to negotiate peace and a ceasefire, Zelensky's press secretary Sergei Nikiforov said on Saturday. At Ukraine at Kremlin Russia _ at Russia # stop the war. News.net Zelensky accepts Putin's proposal, ready for peace talks. Newsflash Kyiv, February 26, 2022, BSS/TASS. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has accepted Russian President Vladimir Putin's proposal and is ready to February 26, 2022 from Rajshahi, Bangladesh. Ukrainian president's spokesman Sergei Nikiforov noted that Zelensky agreed with Putin's proposal and was ready to talk on peace and a ceasefire. Consultations about the time and place of the talks are currently ongoing, he said. On Thursday, Russia launched a military operation in the Ukrainian autonomous region of Donbass, after authorities from the Donetsk People's Republic, DPR, and Lugansk People's Republic, LPR, requested help to repel the aggression from Kyiv. On February 21, Moscow recognized the independence and sovereignty of both territories and signed treaties of friendship, cooperation and mutual assistance with the leaders of the DPR and LPR, including establishing diplomatic relations and providing military aid.
Russia is ready to send its delegation to Minsk, Belarus, for talks with Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov told reporters. According to Peskov, the delegation will include representatives of defense and foreign affairs ministers, as well as presidential administration. On Friday, it became known that Ukrainian head of state Volodymyr Zelensky, in a new video message, invited his Russian counterpart to sit down at the negotiating table. Zelensky stressed that this way he intended to stop the killings of civilians. In turn, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Moscow will be ready to start negotiations with Kyiv after the Ukrainian military laid down their arms. He also assured that the Russian side was not going to oppress the Ukrainian military in any way. On February 24th, President Putin announced the launching of a special military operation to protect the Donbass.
Computer is not responding very fast. I clicked here a couple of times now. Okay. So that's telesurenglish.net. We already read this CGTN article. Fundamental solution lies in neutral status of Ukraine, de-escalation, diplomatic solutions, possibility of a peaceful solution for Ukraine crisis, CGTN, 21st February 2022, and Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status, February 25th. So they're all reporting that. But some report about negativity from Zelensky, basically, qua that neutral status. So what's going on there? I don't know why it switched, but let's read this on caspiannews.com.
Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status by Vasily Abasov, February 25, 2022. The Podoliak's statement came amid reports claiming that Russian forces are already on the outskirts of Kyiv, a city of 3 million people. As Russia's invasion of Ukraine continues for second day, Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to the Ukrainian presidential office, voiced his country's readiness for talks on neutral status. He stressed that Ukraine would need security guarantees from Moscow to do so. Ukraine has always left and leaves room for negotiations, RBC quoted Podolyak as saying. Including now, even after Russia launched a full-scale invasion. This war must be stopped. These hostilities must be stopped. Podolyak echoed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who earlier accused the West of leaving Ukraine to face Moscow alone. On Friday, President Zelensky said that European countries showed no readiness to fight with us and see Ukraine in NATO. They all are afraid, he continued, adding that Ukraine is not afraid, just as it is not afraid to talk with Russia about a neutral status and guarantees. Ukraine has long been trying to join NATO in hopes of gaining protection against what Kyiv calls to be Russian aggression. The Kremlin, however, has repeatedly claimed that Ukrainian membership in the military alliance would be dangerous for Russia. "We heard from Moscow today that they want a dialogue," Podolyak said, referring to the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov's proposal to send a delegation to the Belarusian capital Minsk for talks regarding Ukraine's possible neutral status. "If they want to speak about a neutral status, we are not afraid of such discussions. The issue is who and how can guarantee Ukraine's security and fulfillment of agreements by the guarantors," Podolyak added. The Podolyak's statement came amid reports claiming that Russian forces are already on the outskirts of Kyiv, a city of 3 million people. The government announced a curfew in the Ukrainian capital from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. local time. On Monday, Russian President Vladimir Putin recognized the so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics as independent entities. He signed friendship, cooperation, and mutual assistance agreements with the two separatist territories. On Thursday, Russia launched an all-out offensive in Ukraine, claiming that the assault was aimed to protect the people of two self-proclaimed separatist-controlled regions of Ukraine allegedly being attacked by the Ukrainian military. The Kremlin explained that the decision was made after separatist leaders of the so-called republics had asked Moscow for military support against Kyiv. Although Putin claimed that Russia had no intention to occupy Ukraine, media reported a series of loud explosions heard across the country, including Kyiv, Odessa, and Kharkiv, shortly after Putin's announcement. Reports from local authorities announced shelling and firing across 17 of Ukraine's 27 regions, while a BBC report stated that Russia also hit Ivano-Frankivsk International Airport in western Ukraine. On Friday, fighting seemingly intensified, with Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba saying horrific rocket attacks hit the capital city of Kyiv just before 4 a.m. as Russian forces advanced. According to Kuleba, there were several explosions, gunfire, and missile strikes in or around the city. "Last time our capital experienced anything like this was in 1941 when it was attacked by Nazi Germany," he wrote on his Twitter page. According to BBC, fighting is also raging at an airfield on the outskirts of Kyiv, and it could become a springboard for the Russian army into Kyiv. Following clashes, Russian forces have seized control of the decommissioned Chernobyl nuclear plant and surrounding exclusion zone in northernmost Ukraine, close to the Belarusian border and just 132 kilometers from Kyiv. Ukraine declared martial law across Ukraine and banned all men aged 18 to 60 from leaving the country. President Zelensky signed a decree ordering a general mobilization, meaning all Ukrainians are being urged to defend their homeland, and conscripts and reservists are being called up. Ukraine and Russia, the two post-Soviet countries, have been at odds since the 2014 crisis in Ukraine's southern and eastern regions. Ukraine accuses Russia of annexing the Crimean Peninsula, a territory that extends into the Black Sea, and backing anti-government separatist regimes in the country's eastern regions of Donetsk and Lugansk. Since then, the crisis has destabilized the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, collectively known as Donbas. Kyiv and the West have accused Russia of supporting the separatist regimes in Donetsk and Lugansk with weapons and troops.
Okay, well, here we have Google News. Russian forces target Ukrainian civilian areas as missile hits central Kharkiv. 38 minutes ago, Wall Street Journal. Russian artillery kills 70 Ukrainian soldiers at military base, official says. February 28th, recap. USA Today, 17 hours ago. Russia pummels Ukraine's second largest city as convoy nears Kyiv. 1 hour ago, WCNC reports. What happened on day 5 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the New York Times, 17 minutes ago. Tuesday briefing, Russian convoy bears down on Kyiv, The Guardian 6 hours ago. Starlink satellite internet terminals sent by Elon Musk arrive in Ukraine. Ukraine received, that's New York Times 5 hours ago, Ukraine receives shipment of Starlink terminals less than 48 hours after Elon Musk promised them. Fox Business 13 hours ago. Russian billionaire Friedman says Ukraine war should stop. Friedman. Reuters 1 hour ago. Yeah, of course. We shouldn't risk a world war in an attempt to create a cyber attack on the global financial system to impose a cashless society that people don't want. They don't want to own nothing. I think most people don't want to give up everything they own to live in a cashless society. And they don't want medical tyranny, they want medical choice. TikTok joins Meta in restricting access to Russian state media. Would Vladimir Putin actually use nuclear weapons? He has talked about that if Ukraine would join NATO and attempt to get Crimea back. What's the risk of nuclear war from the Russia-Ukraine conflict? BBC News. Bye-bye children, building Britain's caliphate. 16 hours ago. Moderna faces new lawsuit over lucrative coronavirus vaccine, Washington Post yesterday. So, what other articles did I have prepared? Caspian News. You read that already, right? So next is basically Bloomberg.com. US sanctions Putin. Key aides as Russian forces encircle Kiev. Xi signaled support for negotiations in call with Putin. Kiev mayor says Russian forces already in the capital. Is there anything about neutrality in there? The Russian president said earlier he's ready to authorize negotiations with Ukraine about the country adopting a quote neutral unquote status. It also remains to be seen what the premise of the discussions would be and how each side would define what neutrality means. They could also call it a ceasefire agreement, but there are forces at work that would like to prevent that, to genocide the global population, and to impose a totalitarian New World Order. And the book quotes $1 million Georgia Guidestones and speeches Biden pursuing that New World Order. He made that clear as well. And according to online sources, Joe Biden is a Knight of Malta, as was Adolf Hitler. And according to sources, but according to many, his controlled opposition, Alex Jones, is also a Knight of Malta. And then there are the Rockefellers and Rothschilds, bankers, etc. In a later address, he said that Ukraine was not afraid, quote, to talk about neutral status, unquote, but went on to demand security guarantees and say that the country's fate depended on its army. I've covered Vladimir Putin being a war criminal in previous broadcasts. Perhaps I should take that along in this broadcast. Okay, I had to get some text ready. Some links that I opened. Putin, Ukraine and International Law. Dr. Taras Kusio, Senior Fellow, CIUS, University of Alberta. Talk given to the University of Toronto, 28th of March 2017. Explanations for the Russian-Ukraine crisis. Russia is portrayed as the victim. Apologia for land grab of Crimea. The Donbass is not a, quote, civil war, unquote. Putin is a warmonger and has violated international law. 1. Putin has launched 4, quote, small victorious wars, unquote, in Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine and Syria. 2. Committed massive war crimes in Chechnya, Donbass and Syria. Violation of the UN Charter, OSCE, and many other international laws and treaties. He violated the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, to which Russia was a signatory, and violated the 1997 Ukraine-Russia Interstate Treaty. According to this professor. Okay, I can put the links in the description. Why invasion is a crime neither Russia nor its president will pay for. And that article makes clear what the law says. I can use the text-to-speech engine when they're messing with my throat with hybrid insects of DARPA.
What the law says about Russia invading Ukraine is simple: it's illegal. Wars of aggression, as this would be defined, have only been explicitly unlawful in international law since 1974, but the idea that they should be has been around for a very long time. Since the League of Nations was created out of the ashes of World War I, there has been general acceptance that invading other countries is wrong. The United Nations turned its mind specifically to aggression in 1967. After 7 years of arguing over semantics, a special committee reported back to the General Assembly, which adopted Resolution 2330 without demur. It defines what is an act of aggression, for the purposes of the UN Charter established in 1945. The resolution speaks of aggression as the most serious and dangerous form of the illegal use of force. Specifically, aggression is defined as the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity or political independence of another state. It includes invasion, bombardment, blockades or any other form of attack by armed forces. It describes every single thing Russia is doing to and in Ukraine.
Well, if there would be a world war over this, then Putin might pay personally for this as well. Also, if there would be cyber attacks. On the global financial system and, of course, the power supply, according to the Klaus Schwab prediction. And of course, he's a Bilderberg member. He was on the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. And so are Bill Gates and George Soros, of course. Vladimir Putin and a notorious population reducer, so how anybody can go along with this is a mystery to me. But directed energy weapon torture might have to do with that. Politico.eu, Vladimir Putin, war criminal. The Russian leader has a long record of inhumanity. We could read that, it's not a very long article.
Vladimir Putin, war criminal, the Russian leader. Vladimir Putin, War criminal. The Russian leader has a long record of inhumanity. Russia politics. Putin. Russian President Vladimir Putin was an agent of the Soviet secret police. Natalia Kolesnikova, AFP via Getty Images by Alexander J. Modal January 7, 2017 5:23 a.m. Share. Newark, New Jersey. Russia's criminal behavior in Syria is just the latest in a long string of crimes perpetrated by Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's incoming administration may be unwilling to admit it, but Putin is a war criminal. The U.S. government may need to negotiate with him, but it should remember that he is a butcher. Russia's leader has a long record of inhumanity. He was an agent of the Soviet secret police, a criminal institution with a record that goes back to mass killings perpetrated by the henchmen of Soviet dictators Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin. Putin knew the KGB's record when he joined it in 1975, at the height of its crackdown on the Soviet dissident movement and just 7 years after the country's armed forces crushed the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia. When Putin came to power in 1999, he almost certainly approved, and perhaps even orchestrated, the bombings of 2 apartment buildings in Moscow, in which hundreds of innocent Russians lost their lives. As Amy Knight, a specialist on the KGB, argues, the evidence makes it abundantly clear that the Russian Security Service, the FSB, which succeeded the KGB, was responsible for carrying out the attacks. Concludes Knight, it is inconceivable that the bombings would have been done without the sanction of Putin, who exploited the panic they created to crack down on the Chechens and present himself as an indispensable leader. During Putin's years in office, a series of Russian Democrats, journalists and opposition leaders have been killed in mysterious circumstances. Putin used the bombings to reignite the Second Chechen War, in which he launched a massive air and land campaign that produced thousands of refugees, reduced much of the Chechen capital Grozny to rubble and killed at least 25,000 civilians. Putin has funded, promoted, supplied and aided and abetted the Russian and pro-Russian terrorists in eastern Ukraine. Thus far, that war has taken 10,000 lives. It was Putin's proxies who shot down Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 on July 17, 2014, killing 298 innocent people aboard. Russia's ruthless bombing of Syria's civilian population and targets has been termed criminal by various Western leaders and human rights organizations, prompting U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Samantha Power to ask her Russian counterpart, is there no act of barbarism against civilians, no execution of a child, that gets under your skin? That just creeps you out a little bit? Is there nothing you will not lie about or justify? During Putin's years in office, a series of Russian Democrats, journalists and opposition leaders have been killed in mysterious circumstances. The most prominent being Alexander Litvinenko, Anna Politkovskaya, Boris Nemtsov, Sergei Magnitsky, Natalia Estamirova, Sergei Yushchenkov, Paul Klebnikov, Stanislav Markelov and Anastasia Babarova. In October, Russian nationalists were allegedly involved in plotting to assassinate the Prime Minister of Montenegro, Milo Djukanovic. Some 12 opposition leaders from various parts of the former Soviet Union have also been killed in mysterious circumstances in Turkey, suggesting Russian assassins may be at work. The record speaks for itself. Putin is a killer and war criminal, no different in the breadth and depth of his criminality than the Serbian war criminal, Slobodan Milosevic. He must be treated as such by world leaders with even a minimal commitment to human rights and basic decency. What should world leaders do? First, they should openly condemn Putin's behavior. Silence implies endorsement, and policymakers must understand their moral standing, and that of their countries, is on the line if they refuse to take a public stand. One day, Putin will be gone, and Russia's democratic opposition will be able to make their country a decent, law-abiding state. Second, they should refuse to shake his hand, attend photo ops with him and create the impression that they accept his behavior. Unless Trump is willing to embrace former Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke in public, he should refrain from doing the same with Russia's criminal leader. Third, policymakers should avoid doing anything that aids and abets Putin's criminal proclivities. Sanctions must not only be maintained, they should be intensified, not because they will change Putin's barbaric behavior, but because the West and the world must demonstrate they oppose barbarism. Most important, world leaders should actively defend Russian Democrats and support Russia's still democratic neighbors, above all the Baltic states Georgia and Ukraine. One day, Putin will be gone, and Russia's democratic opposition will be able to make their country a decent, law-abiding state. In the meantime, Putin must be told in no uncertain terms that the world will not tolerate any more imperialist land grabs and wars. If the Trump administration fails to act accordingly, it will be announcing to the world that butchery is the new normal. Alexander J. Modell is a professor of political science at Rutgers University in Newark.
So strive for universal peace, bring peace to the Ukraine, be a hero instead of a butcher, comparable to the likes of Adolf Hitler with his imperialism, totalitarianism, and dictatorialism. And he went for a New World Order, a totalitarian New World Order as well, of course. A Neuordnung, the Wiki Neuordnung article, Nazi eugenics article, check it out. 170 global groups call for moratorium on new genetic extinction technology at United Nations Convention, December 5th, 2016. The Luciferian United Nations have refused it, but that doesn't mean that these 170 global groups, including many scientists, professors and doctors, don't want that moratorium on this gene-derived mass extinction technology anymore. Preventing beats curing and not selling beats curing. Bill Gates is not a medical doctor. He's a eugenics businessman. So check that Nazi eugenics article. And also study the connections of, for example, the Rockefeller family that aided and abetted the Nazis and funded Dr. Joseph Mengele, who also experimented on children. So, that's etcgroup.org. Zombie preparedness, the cdc.gov zombie preparedness page has an interesting article, a zombie preparedness blog for educators, poster and graphic novel, and I think that's this link, Preparedness 101. I downloaded the document. Let's see if we can also reach it this way, perhaps. Because it has an interesting list of things people can get to prepare and survive a possible zombie apocalypse. Klaus Schwab made clear that it changes you when you take genetic editing as an example. That video is also on my channel, I hope to bring that back. It had about 5,000 views also, but they can find it on other YouTube channels, no doubt. Zombie preparedness graphic novel, view the novel, or download PDF. Oh. I have to click turn the page all the time, then I'd rather have the PDF anyway. As long as I don't have to re-download it. Okay, and then at the end of this PDF we can find that list of things to get to prepare. To help save lives and increase chances that we survive it ourselves. To prevent the cyber attack and prevent the population reduction to 500 million. Some people claim that more than 500 million total global population would not be sustainable, but they're lying. In reality, 8 billion people are sustainable and the earth is not overpopulated. So arrest people that openly incite to commit genocide to reduce the global population with any number of illegal methods. remove the illegal Georgia Guidestones that also advocate this maintaining global population around 500 million, and that's of course public and open incitement to commit genocide. All hazards emergency kit. Assemble the following items to create a kit for your home, office, school or vehicle. Number 1 is water, 1 gallon per person per day. Burps are attacking my throat again. Number 2 is food, non-perishable, easy to prepare items, minimum 3 days supply. Flashlight, battery powered or hand crank radio. If there is an EMP, then that wouldn't work anymore unless you put it in a metal bin that is grounded. A cage of Faraday. Weather radio if possible. Extra batteries. Geoengineering, of course, and they can predict the weather more accurately as well. Extra batteries, first aid kits, whistle, antibiotic, ointment, bandages, face masks, gloves, and reference book. Medications, 7-day supply, and medicinal dispensers if necessary. Multi-purpose supplies, wrench, pliers, plastic shield, sheet, duct tape, scissors, matches. Sanitation, personal hygiene items and bleach. Copies of personal documents, medication list and pertinent medical information, proof of address, deed, lease to home, passports, birth certificates, insurance policies. Well, of course, they're going to declare martial law, and then confiscate the homes of the American people and people worldwide, and put them in worker camps under Executive Order 11,000 to build big, better Bill Gates' compact cities. So all these homes will be destroyed under the guise of COVID spread prevention, perhaps also other reasons. So after they declare martial law, supposedly the state, the government may confiscate our homes and displace us, put us in genocidal green zones of the CDC. The CDC shielding approach document makes clear that that may increase morbidity and mortality, but some people see that as a goal, as a good thing, of course. So, in fact, they are concentration camps where 50 risk group people will be concentrated together. That's where the word comes from, concentration camps, concentration of risk group people or any other group of people together. So we had concentration camps before the Second World War already, of course. Cell phone with charger, cancer cell phone, can also be used in airplane mode, also when the network, cancer cell phone network is down. And you can charge it with a solar charger if you have that. Family disaster plan, family and emergency contact information, extra cash, emergency blanket. That's a good one as well. Extra clothes, sleeping bag, one for each person, maps of the area. Good list, also water on it, number 1. Consider the needs of all family members and add supplies to your kit. Suggested items to help meet additional needs are specific medical supplies, hearing aids, extra batteries, glasses, contact lenses, syringes, cane to walk with, baby supplies, bottles, formula, baby food, diapers, games and activities for children, pet supplies, collar, leash, ID, food carrier, bowl, two-way radios, extra set of car keys and house keys. And if you have medicine that you are totally dependent on to stay alive, then it's best to get a year of that in advance, or as much as you can get, a couple of years. For more information, visit cdc.gov/phpr. Alright, next. Israel hosts cyber pandemic exercise simulating a cyber attack on global financial system with 10 countries, IMF, World Bank and BIS. And in the past we've often seen that these exercises supersede the real events. And they can be false flags in war situations. They're talking about it now in relation to Russia, Putin, and there are also terror attack false flags, so they have the exercise. I showed that image already, citizens.action.network on Facebook. Let's see if I can get that fast. Yes. So people can verify that online. Actions form a pattern, some say. Collective strength, unquote, simulated attack on the financial sector is a continuation of global efforts to prepare the public and private sectors for a coming cyber pandemic that would wreak havoc over all of society. Perspective, thesociable.co. I did a broadcast about it as well. Next, this is the PDF file, also via another link that's still available. The other thing wasn't available anymore, so that's via cached-pages.com, the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. People can retrieve old pages and also previous versions of, for example, Wikipedia, Facebook and other pages, as long as they've been stored. There are add-ons for that, so then you can store your own pages so that they'll still be available via Wayback Machine, cached-pages.com. Okay, EU places Putin Lavrov on sanctions list. Did we check that already? Putin wants Ukraine to become neutral buffer zone, Russian observers. Let's read this also.
February 19, Putin wants Ukraine to become a neutral buffer zone, Russian observers. Russian observers are saying that Russian President Vladimir Putin wants Ukraine to become a neutral buffer zone. Interfax is also reporting that Russia's investigative committee is sending experts to Rostov, Russia to interview individuals who evacuated from the Donbas region in Ukraine, where breakaway republics have been in armed conflict with the Ukrainian army dating back to 2014. Experienced investigators and criminologists, based on the testimonies of victims of the actions of Ukrainian military personnel, witnesses and eyewitnesses, will form an evidence base that will help to expose and subsequently bring to justice all those responsible, the report says. Chairman of the Investigative Committee Alexander Ivanovich Bastrikin instructed the heads of the main investigative directorate, the Investigative Committee of the Investigative Committee of Russia for the Rostov region, as well as the heads of other regional investigative departments of the Investigative Committee of Russia, operating on the territory where the refugees will arrive, to take comprehensive measures to establish and procedurally record the criminal actions of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, if, on the territory of Donbass, a press release says. Fox News' Amy Kellogg contributed to this report.
So I think I already played this video earlier. I'll try to get the links in the description. And we covered all articles then. Ukraine and Russia may discuss ceasefire neutral status. Yeah, I think I read that. Bloomberg. OANN.com. OANN.com. One American News Network. Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status official. Well, you can also just have talks, organize some kind of talks, and then see what the options are to de-escalate and bring peace to Ukraine. Good options for both parties. And perhaps UN or NATO or others could help to bring that up, to set it up and organize it and bring peace to the world instead of world war.
Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status. Official servicemen of the Ukrainian National Guard take positions in central Kyiv. Servicemen of the Ukrainian National Guard take positions in central Kyiv, Ukraine, February 25, 2022. Reuters, Gleb Garanik, February 25, 2022. By Pavel Polityuk. Reuters, Ukraine wants peace and is ready for talks with Russia, including on neutral status regarding NATO. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak told Reuters on Friday, if talks are possible, they should be held. If in Moscow they say they want to hold talks, including on neutral status, we are not afraid of this, he said via text message. We can talk about that as well. Our readiness for dialogue is part of our persistent pursuit of peace. Ukraine currently is not part of NATO or the European Union, though it wants to join both. Anathema to its former overlord Moscow, Ukraine gave up its nuclear arms, after gaining independence on the breakup of the Soviet Union, in exchange for security guarantees from European countries. After pro-democracy protests toppled a Russia-led Ukrainian president in 2014, Moscow annexed the Black Sea Peninsula of Crimea from Kyiv and went on to back rebels fighting government troops in the east of the country. 7 years later, Russian President Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine from the air, sea and land on Thursday, and his troops were advancing on the capital Kyiv on Friday. Reporting by Pavel Polityuk, writing by Gabriela Bachzinska, editing by Hugh Lawson and John Boyle.
Next, Washington Examiner and opinion piece.
Opinion: UN should evict Russia, then implement no-fly zone in Ukraine by Quinn Hillier, commentary writer, February 28, 2022, 4:28 p.m. Print this article just in. Another minimum wage experiment. Republican senators must be smart with Supreme Court confirmation. Satellite images show 40-mile Russian military convoy near Kyiv. Hundreds of Russian mercenaries in Kyiv with orders to kill Zelensky. Report: Russia suspected of using devastating cluster bombs and thermobaric rockets in Ukraine. How conservatives are missing the point on transgender ideology. Roberts says he did not ask Gorsuch or any other justices to mask up on Supreme Court bench. Biden faces questions about access and transparency ahead of press conference if Russian dictator Vladimir Putin continues to prosecute his self-chosen war in Ukraine. The United Nations ought to use its Article 42 powers to do a collective military intervention against Russian forces. It can and should do so after implementing Ukraine's suggestion to evict Russia from the UN Security Council, because the UN never officially authorized Russia to take the former Soviet Union's permanent Security Council seat. Furthermore, as Russia is brazenly violating the UN Charter, it could and should be booted from the whole assembly. Regardless, without a veto from Russia, the UN's collective security provisions can be activated and a no-fly zone enforced in order to keep Ukraine from being conquered. As a collective action of the entire world against Russia's aggression, it would leave Russia in a bind, unable to blame, or retaliate against, just one or two nations for taking arms against it. And as a purely defensive action that does not threaten Russian territory, but only protects that of the sovereign nation of Ukraine, a no-fly zone and other targeted military assistance for the latter would leave Russia hard-pressed to respond. Even those of us who are no fans of the UN should see that using its existence to good advantage in a crisis is a way to make lemonade from bitter lemons. Rarely in modern history has one nation, or rather the president of one nation, become such a universal international pariah as Putin now has, and deservedly so. The world should put some muscle behind its desire to isolate Putin in a cage. Yes, a caged Putin might again threaten nuclear war. But what can he do? Nuke the entire world? Surely, Putin's generals would evict him in a coup before carrying out such orders from him. The United Nations was founded, and its collective security provisions created, exactly for circumstances such as this one, in which a heavily nuclear-armed state invades an innocent neighbor. Let's stop Russia now, before the invasion can succeed. WashingtonExaminer.com. February 28, 2022. Ukraine ready for talks with Russia on neutral status. Official Reuters 4 days ago. Moscow puts forward ultimatum, Ukraine's neutral status. Ukraine formed 5 days ago. Russia says Ukraine neutrality, demilitarization key to ending conflict. 10 DTV 18 hours ago, February 27, 2022. Russia-Ukraine news. CNN yesterday. Which countries are sending military aid to Ukraine? Al Jazeera English yesterday. Putin says he's ready for talks with Ukraine after Xi called Bloomberg 4 days ago. Zelensky says he is not afraid to discuss Ukraine's neutral status with Russia. TASS 4 days ago. Neutral Ukraine a non-starter in Russia peace talks. Asia Times 21 hours ago. Switzerland and Ukraine. The end of neutrality. National Review 19 hours ago. China clarifies neutral stance as Russia, Ukraine poised for talks. Global Times 2 days ago. Ukraine invasion, Zelensky requests EU membership for his country. South China Morning Post yesterday. Live updates, Zelensky declines US offer to evacuate Kyiv. Associated Press 3 days ago. Xi pursues policy of pro-Russian neutrality despite Ukraine war. Financial Times 2 days ago. Watch, Ukraine ready for peace talks but we are not ready to capitulate, says Ambassador. PBS NewsHour 4 days ago. Ukraine conflict, Kyiv braces for Russian assault. BBC News 4 days ago. State Department, says Moscow's Ukraine diplomacy was a pretense. The New York Times 3 days ago. Gulf states' neutrality on Ukraine reflects deeper Russian ties. Financial Times yesterday. Neutral Ukraine a non-starter in Russia peace talks. Putin's call for denazification of Ukraine suggests he envisages installation of a pro-Moscow regime in exchange for a ceasefire by Stefan Wolf and David Hastings. Done March 1, 2022. Print. On February 27, 2022, a man and his daughter joined a London protest to oppose Russia's attack on Ukraine. Photo, Asia Times. Jeff Powell. Now that Russia and Ukraine have agreed to start negotiations at the Belarusian-Ukrainian border, one of the key questions is what should be on the agenda to provide a way out of the current crisis. One of Vladimir Putin's stated justifications for his aggression against Ukraine is the need to remove the dagger to the throat of Russia by insisting on Kyiv's neutrality and demilitarization, leaving aside, for a moment, the illegality of Russia's use of force in pursuit of this demand and serious doubts about whether Putin can be trusted in any negotiations. What would neutrality entail for Ukraine? To the extent that this can be done on the basis of Putin's pronouncements to date, Ukraine would have to give up its right to join either NATO or the EU, completely demilitarize and not allow foreign, for which, read Western, military bases on what will be left of its territory. Russia's vision of neutrality for Ukraine will also mean a Moscow-friendly government in Kiev that defers to the Kremlin in both domestic and foreign policies. The notion of the Finlandization of Ukraine has been widely discussed. The legal framework for this consisted of the 1947 peace treaty with Finland and the 1948 Finno-Soviet Agreement of Friendship, Cooperation, and Mutual Assistance. Article 8 of the 1947 treaty required Finland to ban any organizations conducting propaganda hostile to the Soviet Union. The 1948 agreement, although not requiring demilitarization, stipulated in Article 4 that Finland must not conclude or join any coalition directed against the Soviet Union. The 1947 peace treaty with Finland also reaffirmed a provision of the 1944 Armistice Agreement that Finland would lease a naval base to the Soviet Union for 50 years, which Moscow, however, gave up in 1956. Other alleged successful precedents for neutrality providing a potential solution to the current crisis include the 1955 Austrian State Treaty and the earlier neutrality of Belgium, agreed at the London Conference of 1830 to 1832. It is true that following the Austrian State Treaty, all Allied occupation forces withdrew from the country and Austria enshrined perpetual neutrality in its constitution and a constitutional act of parliament which declared that in all future times Austria will not join any military alliances and will not permit the establishment of any foreign military bases on her territory. Belgium became a perpetually neutral state under the terms of London Conference. The five great powers of the time, Britain, France, Prussia, Austria and Russia, undertook to guarantee to it that perpetual neutrality, as well as the integrity and inviolability of its territory. This, however, did not prevent Belgium from having its neutrality violated twice by Germany at the beginning of each World War. Nor were any of the three countries seen as offering a potential blueprint for Ukrainian neutrality. Belgium, Finland, and Austria, required to demilitarize, and none of them had their very right to existence challenged in the same way that Putin has done regarding Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has questioned Ukraine's right to statehood. Photo, Wikipedia. Whose country is it anyway? For these reasons alone, one must be skeptical about a neutrality solution along the lines of Belgium, Finland and Austria. Putin's further insistence on the denazification of Ukraine also suggests that he envisages a future say in the composition of the Ukrainian government, and quite possibly the installation of a pro-Moscow regime as a result of any negotiations on a ceasefire. Russia will require more than the legal and constitutional entrenchment of Ukrainian neutrality, as established by the Austrian State Treaty. It is also unlikely to permit the kind of exit clause embedded in Article 8 of the Finno-Soviet Friendship Agreement, which allows either side to terminate the agreement every 5 years with a 1-year notice period. It is far more likely that Russia will also insist on formal Western recognition of Ukrainian neutrality, as well as some sort of international mechanism, with Russian participation, to interpret what is permissible for Ukraine under the terms of its neutrality. Nor is it clear what would be in such an agreement for Ukraine. From a Ukrainian perspective, the fate of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, in which Russia, the UK and the US reaffirmed their commitment to Ukraine to respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine and to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine. These security guarantees were offered in exchange for Ukraine's abandonment of its Soviet-inherited arsenal of nuclear weapons. Return to diplomacy. There is also the question of which version of Ukraine Russia would recognize as a sovereign state if Ukraine were to agree to becoming neutral. Would this include the illegally occupied and now recognized areas of Donetsk and Luhansk and the annexed Crimean Peninsula? The Kremlin's vision of a Belarus-like vassal state with a highly conditional and very limited sovereignty dictated by Putin is one which Ukraine has clearly, consistently, and democratically rejected over the past 30 years. Neutrality on these terms seem unlikely to be the basis of how this conflict ends. For the West more generally, it is also important that Putin is not rewarded, or seen to be rewarded, for his illegal war. The idea that Ukraine should be demilitarized and denazified as a price for ending the conflict would be seen internationally as capitulation. Instead, The West needs to continue to show resolve in proactively containing Russia. Anything else would have resonance, and negative ramifications, far beyond Europe, muddying the diplomatic waters further with an unpalatable, and in all likelihood unattainable, solution wastes precious time and resources that now would be better devoted to achieving a stable ceasefire and an end to Russia's aggression. Only then will a much-needed discussion on a more viable European security order have any prospects of success.
Well, I think both parties could make some concessions and avoid a world war over this. But perhaps they have handlers that don't allow them to do that. They wanted cashless society and to get down to 500 million total global population. Possibly Project Teardrop, supposedly a top secret project of these intel agencies, which are all compartmentalized, and they might deny its existence if it's real. Project Teardrop to reduce the global population to 500 million. They pretend that more than 500 million total global population would not be sustainable. Well, this global genocidal cyber attack must be prevented one way or another. Millions of people who die from that. So it's up to them to do that, or to go down in history as the warmongers, the Adolf Hitlers, etc. That want to impose a totalitarian New World Order. So I'm for whatever is best for all the people of Ukraine and the people of planet Earth. And I hope these leaders are too, and that it is possible to meet each other halfway and to bring peace to the Ukraine. And that there are an infinite number of ways to do that. So I hope they prevent this cyber attack on the global financial system, the power supply, and the internet. But to me it seems like they've already planned this. It's totally prepared, and they're lockstepping towards 500 million total global population. So that's it for this broadcast. Thank you all for watching. Tune in next time on Perfect Society. Kiss for single ladies who like one. I'm Ulrich Hofmann, and I can check the comments if there are any comments. Maybe I can check that next time. No comments. 10 playbacks. Well, that's a beginning, because I have not streamed on this channel for a long time. It's logical that it will take time to build up a viewer audience again, but people can always Skype me. Also, if they would like to do a broadcast, Skype Prologic 999. Prologic 999. 3 times the number 9. Okay. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And prevent a cyber attack by any means necessary. And de-escalate to avoid a world war. Biden mentioned world war if Putin would invade Ukraine. And Putin mentioned nuclear weapons if the Ukraine would join NATO and attempt to get Crimea back. So, preventing beats curing, not selling beats curing. Until next time, on Perfect Society, I'm Ulrich Hofmann. May peace be with you all, and be prepared. Depart from evil and do good. Universal peace now.